Well, let's wrap our minds around some of this for a while. Over 55 years ago, an inspired black preacher raised his voice out of the Deep South to add his challenge to the growing chorus of Americans calling for an end to the cruel legacy of a prejudice and bigotry that was making a mockery out of the claim that America was indeed the land of the free and the home of the brave. Yeah, thank you. And this, some 55 years later, what can we say about him? What can indeed we say about him? Well, try this. From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years. Too short to gather the fruits of your labor. Too short to gather the comfort of your parents when your brother drowns. Too short to comfort your father when mother dies. Too short to see your children finish school. Too short to ever enjoy grandchildren. Too short to know retirement. 39 years is just too short. Just too short. From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years, yet it's too long to be crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. It's too long to stand in the quicksand of racial injustices. It's too long to receive threatening phone calls, often at the rate of 40 a day. It's too long to live under the sweltering heat of continuous pressure. It's too long. 39 years is just too long. From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years. Yet it's long enough. It's long enough to journey all the way to India, to learn under a great teacher how to walk through angry crowds and stay cool. It's long enough to be chased by police dogs and lashed by the rushing waters from the firemen's hoses because you are dramatizing the fact that justice has a way of eluding our brothers and sisters. It's long enough to spend many days in jail while protesting the plight of others. It's long enough to have a bomb thrown into your home. It's long enough to teach angry, violent men to be still while you pray for the bombers. It's long enough. It's long enough to enter college. It's long enough to win the Nobel Prize. It's long enough to visit the mountaintop. And it's certainly long enough to have a dream. To have a dream. Martin lived several lifetimes, all rolled into 39 short years. Like any of us, Martin would have welcomed longevity. Yet when he weighed the facts, he once said, it's not how long a man lives, but how well he uses the time allotted to him that really matters. And I say to him, well said. Well said, good and faithful servant. Well done. You have certainly earned your place with the other heroes of the Civil Rights Hall of Fame. This remarkable man, whose life was too short and too long, but long enough, invested a goodly portion of those precious 39 years declaring a vision of tolerance so compelling in its spiritual virtue that it inspired and empowered a nation, 2 presidents, and the majority of the Congress of these United States to add to the law of the land a code of civil rights, a proclamation of justice that for over 50 years has stood at the gate, preserving our American legacy of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone, regardless of race or creed or gender or age or physical ability or sexual preference. On one occasion, Reverend King observed that we are challenged to rise above the narrow confines of our individualistic concerns to a broader concern for all humanity. Through our scientific genius, we have made the world, made it a gathering ground for all that is possible to the human condition. And now we are all involved in a mutual process. Whatever affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. We are links in the great chain of humanity. We have before us the glorious opportunity, and please hear this next line. We have before us the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. Yeah. And if I've ever heard words that would give us a track to run on, let it be that we are here. We gather in unity that we might come together to create an energy that will in fact inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. Noble work indeed. Let's take a look now and see if we can shine the light of understanding on some of the factors that 43 years later still challenge Dr. King's noble endeavor to do that, to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our culture. One well-documented hurdle that still stands between us and the blessed community is a capacity for denial that binds us and blinds us to the existence of deeply embedded cultural values that 40 years later still divide us into opposing camps. Now the opposing camps are red camps and blue camps. One such fly in the ointment of national solidarity is the age-old struggle still going on between two competing paradigms. On the one hand, you have the notion that for a community to be blessed and enduring, it must understand that an authentic appreciation of its diversity is fundamental to its survival, as is its willingness to leave no stone unturned in its efforts to provide for and protect the welfare of all of its people. In this view of the blessed community, there is a sense of togetherness that acknowledges the interdependence and fragility of all life on the planet while supporting the highest development and the fullest participation of every individual. It is this notion of community that inspired the good Reverend King to proclaim, "I have a dream." And the evolution of that kind of community was, and remains, I'm sure, his dream. The alternative notion for conducting community is based on fear. It values only similarities and the familiar in thought and behavior, appearance and aspiration. It believes in every person for her or himself with no obligation to the weak or the vulnerable. In this paradigm, hierarchies are the natural order, with men over women, owners over workers, wealthy elites over everyone else, and humans over all other species. Since it is based on fear, it has a tendency to produce more weapons than food, more prisons than schools. Profit, not people, is its reason for being, and exploitation is its modus operandi. From its point of view, a culture has achieved blessed status only when the domestic agenda includes tax cuts for the rich and other programs designed to benefit an extremely small, highly privileged and connected sector of the private and business community. According to this vision, a community has achieved blessed status when it has eliminated or significantly reduced social support systems like public schools, like national health care programs, income security programs for seniors and disabled citizens, environmental protections, civil and human rights. In short, any initiative based on the notion that it would be noble and spiritually discerning for us to have a vital sense of concern for each other's welfare. And likewise, it may well have been the entrenched nature of this paradigm that drove Martin into the streets to proclaim, "I have a dream, I have a dream." And I think each of us has a dream as well. And I got a hunch that for the most part, we would be right there with Martin. I have a dream. Let's consider for a moment what transformative impulses we might call into play that would take us a little closer to a liberty and justice for all that is authentic, universal, and treasured by all Americans. One process that I believe is crucial for this movement from our current sense of social values to those that would truly bless a community was memorably expressed by the great Mexican poet Octavio Paz when he wrote, "The examination of conscience and the remorse that accompanies it, which is a legacy of Christianity, has been and is the single most powerful remedy against the ills of our civilization." It's time to take a deep look inside, to take a deep look and touch the truth of how it is with us relative to how it's going on out here. Can we sit here? Can we be here? Can we walk here and talk here and authentically embrace how it is right now, or are there places where it wants to change? I think that it will take a fundamental moment of remorse. And this is absolutely essential to the death rebirth experience. A long moment of remorse, a sustained weeping and grief. Fritz Perls once observed that to suffer one's death and be reborn is painful business. And that's the business we're about. Do not fool yourself with that. To die and then to be reborn. It will be a grief of the masculine for the feminine, of men for women, of adults for what has happened to children, of the West for what has happened to every other part of the world, of Judeo-Christianity for pagans and indigenous people. It'll be a remorse and a grief for all of them. Of Christians for Jews, of Jews for the Palestinians, or Palestinians for the Jews, or Muslims, of infidels for Muslims, of whites for people of color, of the wealthy for the poor, of human beings for animals, and all other forms of life. It will take a fundamental metanoia, a self-overcoming, a radical sacrifice to make this transition. Sometimes, when we speak about the emergence of a new paradigm and a new worldview, we focus on the intellectual dimensions of this shift. I'm as interested in those as the next person, but I don't think we can minimize the crucial importance of the moral dimensions for this great transformation to take place. In the end, it will require grace. We can do everything we can do. We can engage the issues with our holistic scientific knowledge, with our jnana yoga, with our karma yoga, with our imagination and our love, but the bottom line is that grace has to play a role in all of this. Probably the most beautiful song by the Grateful Dead was "In the Attics of My Life." The song is kind of like a polyphonic Renaissance chorale from their album, American Beauty. How many of you remember it? Some of you. Oh, Grateful Dead. It's a powerful song from Jerry Garcia's music, from Robert Hunter's profound lyrics. The singers are addressing the divine. When I had no wings to fly, you flew me. When I had no strings to play, you played me. It's a recognition that when the self has been totally emptied in the moment of death, in the ego death, in the dark night of the soul, something else happens. That's when the divine can come through. And finally, nothing is stronger than that. It's within. It's all of us within. It's all of us. It's who we are. It's how it is when we are truly free at last. And how does it look when we capture that vision? When it's within us? When it's who we are? How do we act when grace is revealed? How to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization? Jesus suggested that they will know we are his disciples by our love for one another. And how does that love look when it's purified to this extent? Consider the story of two people who nurtured the idea of the blessed community with their inspiring lives. One was Will Campbell from Tennessee, an old bootleg preacher. He writes in this article from a newspaper, the Charlotte newspaper, back in '93. He was there as a keynote speaker for a celebration of Martin Luther King. He wrote, "There are about as many congregations in America as there are people locked up. The one thing many prison administrators don't like is visitors. Go visit somebody in prison. Since I am some sort of bootleg preacher out of the same religious heritage as the man whose memory has convened us," speaking of Dr. King, "I would say a word about religion in your town. Actually, I know very little about the religion and religiosity of your town, so I will merely make a few general observations on the subject. I do not know how faithful you have been to what you claim to believe, so I'm in no position to judge. I can only say, if your congregations are worthy at all in these times, each one has adopted at least one street person, one person who has no home to return to when the shadows lengthen and the cold wind blows. Just one person to feed, to help, to encourage, to give or find a job, find a house or apartment, get his or her life straightened out. I know there are about as many congregations in the average city as there are homeless people. I suspect that the same is true in your city. Each congregation taking responsibility for just one has solved the problem of the homeless in America, surely one of our most pressing issues. Think about it. Think about it for a moment. We are still a divided people. I invite you today, whatever your ethnic or racial heritage, to make close friends, truly friends, in the most pure understanding of the word friendship, with one person of some other ethnic or racial heritage, just one. If every member of every church, synagogue, or mosque did that, how much closer to the blessed community would we be? How much indeed. The reason? One does not stand silently by when a true friend is being abused. Here's another example. A man named Bob Eckhart. This is written by Molly Ivins. How many remember Molly? What a power. Force of nature indeed. She wrote, one person who did uphold what we're talking about is Bob Eckhart, the great Texas congressman who died in November at 88. That was a while ago. What a rare one, and a lot of fun too. If ever a politician of the 20th century deserved the title legislator, it was Eckhart, legal scholar, craftsman, steeped to his bones in the Constitution and law and history. They called him the House's lawyer. That's the House of Representatives in Congress. He was the brains behind the Clean Air Act and believed in regulating the price of natural gas, even though his Houston district was the epicenter of the petrochemical industry. Boy, does that take chutzpah. Yeah, and a deep commitment to the blessed community. Indeed. It was typical of Eckhart to put what he thought was good for the country ahead of his own political life. He was a character and a camper, a carpenter and a cartoonist, a cheapskate, a horseman, a swimmer, a devoted, if slightly absent-minded father, drinker of whiskey and Shiner draft beer, storyteller, freedom fighter, labor lawyer, environmentalist, and an anti-racist. What a mix in Congress. At least 60 years ago, someone said to his mother, don't miss this. Someone said to his mother, Ms. Eckhart, your son is just a little too cozy with the Negras, don't you think? She replied sweetly, oh, I'm afraid that's my fault. You see, I raised him to be a Christian. If our Christianity doesn't have that factor in it, we got to go back to the drawing board. I have beside me, Molly finishes up, I have beside me the remnants of a bottle of Macallan Scotch he left at my home a few weeks ago. It tastes just as good and it's $10 cheaper, he said. Mr. Eckhart, we salute you. We salute you, we salute you. And that's what it looks like, folks, when we're living Martin's dream. Enjoy the grace. Thank you for being here.